Welcome to the Perspective Knoll, a home to original fantasy stories. Videos are uploaded once a week, feel free to like and subscribe. Enjoy the journey. Chapter 6: A Walk in the Dream World. Shawn and Charles had headed back to the town under the bridge, and now that they had a moment, the town was something of a brilliant dream. The homes lay close enough to one another, but all in a circle around the Geemam house. Almost all of them looked as though they were from a Finger Hut magazine. Small little two-story buildings with a very pointed roof and a small deck that practically wrapped around the entire house. There were little lamps hanging from the corners of some roofs that didn't sway at all, but that might have been due to lack of air movement, and the others were on a post that stuck up from the outer railing of the deck. There were elves all about, and most of which were standing in front of their homes trying to get a good look at their new visitors. Charles and Shawn gave them either a slight wave or head nod, and most of the elves responded in the same sort of manner. There seemed nothing threatening about them. Then that's when they noticed Grendy's large mass coming towards them. There was something very intimidating about him. Not only was he twice as tall as any other elf, but he was built like a bodybuilder. It seemed as though the elves only used him for lifting large, heavy objects or scaring some bugs away. "Good humans," Grendy spoke in a slow, deep voice. "Hope you stay long." "Maybe, we were told by your elder to stay here until otherwise stated," Shawn replied with a shaky voice. "Good," Grendy smiled and walked away. "He seems friendly," said Shawn as he made sure Grendy was out of earshot. "Maybe, but I still don't think he could lift a bowling ball." Charles looked around and saw that there were buildings that hugged the wall coming from the entrance, but on its right side. He scanned the structures and saw that they all had names on them. One said Jack's Wooded Things. Another read Cheryl's Face Markings, and one that piqued his interest most was Kate's Drink. There, Kate's Drink seems like a title for a bar. Maybe we can get some tipsy elves to spill some knowledge? If that's the case, I could use a drink anyways. Let's go. Shawn replied, and Charles hadn't noticed, but they were more than just thirsty, but so hungry that it hurt. Lufforain had so much to see and explore that it made it very difficult to hear what the body was asking for. It was strange that the signs of the buildings were all shining like the street lamps, and this still made Shawn wonder more so how it was all done. They walked into Kate's Drink, and there they filled their bellies with much food that was offered to them from the locals. It was an interesting tasting session. Some food looked very foreign and yet had the sweetest taste. Shawn did take a few different kinds of ales that the elves brewed themselves, and surprisingly enough, was more like a soda. Very fizzy and full of flavor, but still had a good deal of alcohol hidden in all the ingredients. Charles, on the other hand, had no desire to break his sober streak. It had been 5 years, and he thought that a clear head and a full belly would help him go to sleep faster. The night wore on, and soon a little elf maiden named Berinda had offered her home for a place they both could sleep. Inside the home there was furniture from the likes that one would see in a hobbit hole in a Lord of the Rings movie. Shawn was a bit too drunk to comprehend most of it and soon passed out on a small couch by the front door. There was a spare bedroom that Berinda had practically demanded Charles sleep in. How strange, he thought out loud to himself once Berinda had left his room and closed the door behind her. As much as I want to get out of here, there is an undeniable sense of home. Even though I am only 3 inches tall. Charles sat upon the bed and found that it was very springy. Charles kicked his shoes off and laid down on the bed and stared at the ceiling with so many thoughts that they blurred past his mind, and in no way was he able to slow any of it down to concentrate on any one topic. It wasn't long, but Charles fell into a deep sleep, and that's when things got terrifying. Charles opened his eyes. He was no longer in the bedroom of Berinda's home, and better still, was not in the cave at all under the bridge. He stood in an open area that was surrounded by stone structures that had been nearly destroyed. Surely once a great marvel had been reduced to this. There was no one about, and it was a midday. There was a haze that filled the sky, and yet somehow the sun had shone through it as if the haze itself was not there. Charles moved his feet and caught a glimpse of a staircase that led up to a tall tower with a banner that he did not recognize. It had 2 men or elves standing across from one another, and there was a circle in between them, and there were many other smaller circles within the largest. Charles made his way up, and when he got to the top, he scanned the horizon and yet could not see beyond this small village he was in. "How nice of you to sleep," said a voice. Charles turned on his heels, and there was a man leaning up against a wall. He wore a black robe with gold trim, and his hood was covering most of his face. In his hand, there was an object that Charles could not identify, and he realized that his skin color was blue. "Welcome to Lufforain. I'm sure you've been told this already. The man talked with a smooth voice and there was a hint of an English accent. My true name is something I won't give up, but there is something you can call me by, which is Ipog. Great, okay then Ipog, you said it was nice of me to fall asleep, so am I speaking to you through a dream? Charles took a step back and wasn't ready to give in to this man, for all he knew this was Ed's killer. Indeed Charles. This is a dream that I have created for you so that we can talk about what's happening in my realm. Ipog paused and allowed his words to sink in. The realms or universes that are our worlds, are in fact closer than you could ever know. You are not here by chance. Now there is a prophecy that has been written long ago that speaks of beings from another realm that would heal Lufforain. This sounds very fairy tale-ish. I'm sorry, but I do not believe in fate or prophecies, and if you were a real man, you'd come meet me face to face in the real world and not in a dream. At those words, Ipog chuckled and shook his head. He walked to the side of the stony railing that overlooked the mist-covered land below. You think I'd let you have a shot at me in the real world? No, this is my world, the dream dimension, and I will not be matched here. Ipog let out a sigh of frustration. I'm not your enemy, Charles, I'm just looking out for the world I was born in. This world is nothing like mine, began Charles as he scratched his head and tried to calm himself. The rules seem to be non-existent here. I was told to find a murderer who killed a man from my world, and apparently the one who was murdered had spent time here. Do you know anything about that? Did I know Edward Spencer? It was a question but sounded more like a statement, and Ipog turned his head and peered at Charles from under his hood. I know he had enemies here. We all have enemies, Charles. I'm going to read you something that you will want to hear. Ipog now turned his full body towards Charles, and the item he held in his hand was a handcrafted thin, stone jar that held a scroll. Ipog flattened it out and passed it to Charles. Charles took it in his hands and read aloud, "The veil pulled between the worlds. Only by murder can this happen. Two seek to claim the outer worlds. Downfall will come from within. From the other side law will come. If allowed to stay and learn. Peace is what law will bring. Trust in the lawman, Lufforain will be saved." What the hell does that mean? Asked Charles, rereading the script another time silently. I know that where you have come from, that you are a lawman, one who upholds justice and seeks to find those who play gods against your so-called natural order. Here in Lufforain that law is behind the times and fear leads the justice system. There have been no lawmen in Lufforain for some time now, all I want is peace. The wind blew through the empty castle-like building and the banner tore off its post and faded into the mist. Charles breathed in deep and steadied himself. Why must it be me to bring someone from your world to justice? Obviously, the one in question lives here in your world. So why can't yourself or your law members pick up the trail and do your job? There was a pause, as if the very question was too much for Ipog to process. The wind blew even harder now and the sun was quickly fading. This is how it should be, for it is written. If you don't find the murderer, then Lufforain will end in some unspeakable way. This is your destiny, for it will be ours as well. When Ipog had finished speaking, the world around Charles began to be swallowed up by the mist. Soon it was just Charles standing in the fog with no sense of up or down or floating or falling. He was stuck and his senses evaded him. Wake, wake sir, you need to wake, a voice called to Charles. Charles, a voice boomed, and Charles opened his eyes and found himself in the bed that he had fallen asleep in. Next to the bed was Belinda and Valinar the Elder, and both looked worried. What the hell is going on now? Charles asked. They have found us, the Stormbreaker Owls, said Valinar gravely. It's worse though, they have also killed 3 of my guards to send a message to me and our race. There will be a meeting with them in an hour. Charles sat up in the bed and rubbed his eyes. After the dream with Ipog, he felt like he barely had any sleep, in fact he felt worse. So, what does this have to do with me? I believe you are the one they wish to speak to, answered Valinar as he took a step towards the bedroom door. I need you to get ready and meet me and my company on the bridge. Your companion Shawn is already dressed and is speaking with Neil. I believe they are devising a plan to get rid of the owls. Without another word, Valinar turned and left the room. Belinda placed a glass of water on the small table next to the bed. You need to drink. This could be your last. There was much fear and dread in her voice, as if she knew that to be true, but not just for Charles but for all of her people. Charles sat on the edge of the bed, his mind going a mile a minute. The picture, this place, the wood elves, the dream, and the owls, there's no way any of this is real. He thought to himself. As Charles was getting to the bridge, he wondered what he and Shawn could do, being only 3 inches tall. Charles left the cave that they had entered in the day before and saw Shawn with Neil, who were deep in conversation. Charles surveyed the area and found it very quiet and still. There were guards placed at the entrance of the cave. A string of them lay just off the path of rocks in the tall grass, and he could make out the bows in their hands as they all searched the sky. Upon the bridge itself, there was Valinar, and he was accompanied by no less than a dozen guards. There was one in close proximity to Valinar, and he seemed to be going over a plan. There was a piece of paper in his hands, and he was pointing out certain things. "Charles, how do you sleep?" Shawn asked as he walked up with Neil, who had outstretched a hand for Charles to shake it and to bid him a good morning. "I slept fine. Strange dream though." "Ha, I hope that's all it was though." Charles laughed and rubbed his neck and once more put his eyes in the sky. "So, any owl sightings yet?" "Not yet, but we are getting closer to that hour," replied Shawn as he looked at his watch. "Okay, so the plan here, what is the plan?" Charles was concerned for a good reason. "We wait and hear the terms the Stormbreakers give," answered Neil quickly. "If we listen and accept their terms, all goes well and we go back to our lives. If we don't, well, according to the Wood Elves, it's best that we don't resist whatever it is that they want." There was a voice calling down to them from the bridge, and one of the guardsmen was looking in their direction and giving them a gesture to come up. Suddenly, there was a long piercing screech that filled the air just as the 3 of them had reached the top of the bridge. The sound was met by a lesser screech, and soon a large owl was seen flying out of a tree down the road and was coming in fast. Once on top of the bridge, Charles, Shawn, and Neil rushed to the other guards, and Valinar, who was standing at the front, awaited the massive predator to land. There was another loud screech from the creature just before it landed, and with a great gust of its massive wings, it gently touched down. Standing before them, not 20 feet, the impressive sight of what looked like a great horned owl but with much more vibrant colors. The feathers were white around its head, but at the top, a grey point came down to its eyes and got wider as it traveled over its head. The wings were violet with black tips, and the talons were long like spears, ready to cut through any who would oppose it. "I'm glad you listened after all, Valinar," said the owl, leaning forward so to be a little more level with the elves. "It's good to see you again. It's been what, 3 years?" "Not long enough, Mork," Valinar snarled. "Tell me what this is about so we can get this over with and I no longer need to look upon your wicked face." "Careful, Valinar, you are in no position to give me orders, but I do commend you for your brave insults. So, I will agree with you, we need to keep things moving, my queen has little patience." Mork straightened up and paused as if listening for something. He then turned his head all the way around and gave an odd series of squeaks and clicks. He returned his gaze back to the handful of guards around Valinar and then finally looked over to Neil, Charles, and Shawn. "Are those them?" "Them who?" Yet again, another nasty tone from Valinar. "Oh, the humans from beyond the portraits. Don't treat me like a fool, elf. It is the reason why I am here. If you comply with my lady's wishes, then we will leave you alone." "Leave us alone, huh? You have no reason to hunt us any more than a mouse would hunt a cat. There is no value in attacking us. We are strong together and I have no intention of packing up my people and fleeing like cowards before you and your queen." Valinar gripped his staff tightly and slammed the end on the ground, and there was a flash of blinding light that filled the area. "Mork," the owl screeched, not in pain but annoyance. There was a sudden sound of arrows flying through the air and the unmistakable popping sound of one of the elves' mist bomb concoctions. A second later, there were other screeches coming from more owls just above them, and then a sudden blast of wind that swirled all around. Charles and Shawn were both not expecting an attack from the elves, or at least not one that started with blinding anyone who was looking in the direction of the staff that Valinar held. Shawn surveyed the area and noticed that there were now 2 smaller owls standing behind Mork. There were also arrows stuck in the owl's feathers, but Mork shook his entire body and the little sticks fell to the ground. "Sleeping powder?" asked Mork, and he sounded calm as if he was clearly anticipating an attack. "Well, I can't blame you for trying, it's noble. I was expecting this. Meet my close pals, Roland and Harrick." The other 2 owls were just a tad smaller than Mork but looked just as sinister. "Mork!" Valinar spoke through gritted teeth. "I will." "No, you won't," Mork quickly spat. "Because if you were, you would have already done it." Sorry, Elder Valinar, but we have come here for business, not war. Quit being rude to your guest and hear me out. Fine. The answer was in a tone that was filled with decades of hatred, and neither Shawn nor Charles could make out if it was aimed more towards the owls or their queen. Let's take it from the top. It has come to my queen's attention, a Ms. Jolene Hamlin, that a pair of travelers have come to us from beyond a painting. Furthermore, it is known that they have come to visit you of all people. I mean, really such a large forest, and they seek to mingle with you elves before anyone else. Mork chuckled and gave his wings a flap, and the other owls hooted along with his melody. Well, if this is all true, then my queen has but one request, but please confirm it for me first. Charles and Shawn looked at one another, and their spirits plummeted, and then they both eyed Valinar. He too was glancing in their direction, seeming to tussle with any notion that might lead to their dooms. Valinar sighed and looked back at Mork. They are here. Charles, Shawn, could you step over here? Valinar commanded, but his tone was of defeat. First name basis already. Well, these must be some interesting humans indeed. Mork eyed the pair of them as they made their way through the guards and to the left side of Valinar. So here they are. Now tell me what she wants with them, demanded Valinar. Fine, I suppose you did hold true to the rumors about their arrival. She wants one of them. It does not matter which one, either is good enough for her. Mork leaned down and gave Shawn and Charles a better look. One of them? What is it she needs the one for? Asked Valinar. Oh well, those details are a bit above my head, but I hear that it won't be painful. But if she does not get the results she is looking for, then she will have no further use of him. If I refuse to give one up to you, what then? Then Jolene will take them by force and make sure that Littlewood elves don't interfere with her plans ever again. Mork stood up straight once more and looked down his short beak at the elves standing in a half-circle around him. Sounds like an easy decision to make, what some might call a no-brainer. Mork laughed yet again, and if there was a sound for the definition of sinister, that would be it. Excuse me, Mr. Mork, can I ask for a time-out? Shawn stepped forward, and even though he was scared and nervous, it wasn't enough for him to not think of something quickly that would benefit their situation. That's a new one, a time-out? I don't know what that is. Mork leaned down again and tilted his head sideways as he tried to figure out what the newcomer was trying to get at. Can you control time, little human? No. Shawn answered slowly. I just need a second to talk this over with my friends here so that we all can get what the other wants, so please give us a minute. Shawn wasn't sure if this would work, but he did not want Mork to hear the entire plan that he had in his head. Very well, I will spare you a couple of moments, but when I return, you better have an answer. Mork then stretched his massive wings and took off with Roland and Harrick following closely behind. All right, Shawn, what's your plan? Charles moved in close and folded his arms, and his stomach had turned and expected something ridiculous. Let me go with them, Shawn stated simply. No, that is not an option. Charles shook his head and spoke to Shawn as if he was a young boy. Why not let him go? Asked Valinar. If he goes willingly, then we all live to see another day. To see another day? Valinar, I know that you can just as easily make you and your guardsmen as tall as myself in my normal state and literally beat the stuffing out of them, so why won't you do it? Charles was now outraged as if this thought had been brewing within him all morning. You don't understand, Charles. The owls are not the center of my fear in this negotiation, it's Jolene. It will always be that woman. Valinar stepped close to Charles and began to stare him down intently. If I knew we could take her on, then I would have done it already. Would you? Charles was hardly convinced. Hey guys, listen. My plan is simple. Shawn placed a hand on either of their shoulders. Let me go with them. No one here has to die. So, I go with the Stormbreakers and you guys hatch a plan to break me out, and if that means going to war with Jolene, then let's do it. But if you want to avoid that, then a stealth mission to get me out of there unnoticed is our best shot. What do you guys think? Do you know where she lives? Valinar shrugged off Shawn's hand from his shoulder and held his gaze for a moment longer at Charles. I don't know where she lives exactly, but I can get us within close proximity to find it. It's here in the forest and to the west, before the coast. But why you, Shawn, why not me? Asked Charles. Because we still need you to find Ed's killer. Maybe I can see if Jolene knows of anything concerning others going through the painting. But with you free, you can help wrap this case up sooner than I ever could without you, and you can help find a way to get me back safe. It was hard to argue with Shawn. Charles did admit that the plan made sense. Valinor, of course, would not be opposed to the plan because it did not involve the deaths of his people or himself. But turning you over to the hands of this Jolene character, is it even possible to sneak in and get Shawn out once he's there? Beyond risky, but I wouldn't say that it is impossible. If not me, then surely a member or my clan could figure out a safe escape. Valinor looked at Shawn and nodded softly. Your character speaks loudly, Shawn. Perhaps I misread you. I won't do the same with you either. Valinor finished and looked back to Charles and gave a very faint smile. A moment later, Mork gave a screech off in the distance and he was now in the air and gliding back over to them with the same two owls at his back. They landed and Mork still had a sinister look in his eyes. Roland and Harrick landed but stayed back enough to still be on the bridge but only a few feet from the road. Valinor gave Mork a stern look in defiance as if at any moment he would throw out Shawn's plan and duel to the death anyways. So, what will it be? Mork asked. We will give you the one known as Shawn, replied Valinor and held his staff in front of him and clinched it tightly. But if any harm comes to him, you will have the full force of the Wood Elves to deal with. Jolene will answer for such a crime and all who stand against us to honor that sentence. Threats? I'm surprised. Well, no, I'm not. Mork chuckled and paused a few moments before he spoke again. Fine, we will take Shawn and swear not to kill him. Harm is a very vague notion. I mean, a simple cut on his hand could be considered harmful. So, let's just say, his death, then you will come find us and blah blah blah. Look, I'm not one who cares for long drawn-out goodbyes, so little man, you are now coming with us. Mork took Shawn in his left talons and paused. Now Valinor, remember our terms. I will not forget Mork, but know this, your Queen Jolene has no rule of anything, nor will she ever. She and all of your feathered friends will get what's coming to you. In time. No matter what becomes of me and my people. Valinor stood his ground and his guards closed in around him as if by those words that the owls might attack. Oh, you elves are laughable. Mork gave an obnoxious fake laugh and then flew high in the air and turned west. Roland and Harrick followed closely behind them and they both gave loud screeching calls as they began passing the thickening of trees. The more the group flew away from the Wood Elves, they could see more owls coming out of the trees to join the flock. This makes no sense, giving them Shawn will give this Jolene nothing. Charles was enraged and no matter how Shawn may have felt about it, Charles felt a betrayal. You don't know her. She is full of surprises and yet she stands as another reason why we do not trust in magic folks outside of our own people. Valinor the Elder took a seat on what to us would have been a good skipping stone but was a large chair to them. She is the reason why we are like this. My grandfather was the one who led the elves back then when she first came into the forest. She has a troubled past and because of her fears and her lifestyle, she thinks so little of us, like a race that isn't worthy to wield magic. She thinks she is above all that inhabits the Brunil forest. You're hiding, aren't you? You're not exactly standing up to her or her owls. Charles was pissed and even though the expression on Valinor's face told him that the elder was deeply offended, Charles did not care. I'd say she owns you. Charles turned and began to walk away and did not go towards the cave of the Wood Elves' hideout, but to the large stream that they had almost drowned in when they first arrived at their part of the woods. Neil had come up from behind him and began walking in stride with him. He did not speak but was there to hear his thoughts or to be a shadow to walk along with. This surprisingly did not bother Charles at all, but he knew if instead, an elf was following him, that he might tell the elf off. They came to the stream which looked like a massive river. Charles stood looking at the far side, at the grass swaying in a building breeze. Neil stopped just behind him and looked up and found a pair of small blue birds singing on a low branch of the tree behind them. You know, when I first came to this world, I began calculating things, to see if this place wasn't another part of our own world, said Neil as he walked to the left side of Charles and he too looked out over the fast-moving water. The elder states that it's only spring and that there are 8 months in their calendar year and 6 days a week and an even 46 days per month. Okay, none of that is helping my cause whatsoever, Neil. I need to find a killer so I can get home and in fact, no, I don't need to do anything. I'm going back to the portrait and leaving as soon as I'm full size again. Charles hadn't calmed down at all and more than ever wanted a drink. Neil turned and for a moment their eyes met and the frustration from Charles was deep, and at any moment ready to consume anyone who tried to challenge him. Where are you? Neil asked. Charles looked around and shrugged and then shook his head as if unimpressed with whatever game Neil may be playing. You are in another world, Neil answered. Neil crouched over the stony beach, then picked up a small grain of sand and studied it. I didn't think it was possible in my lifetime to get a chance to discover another planet, yet alone taking a walk on it. What we are doing right now, everyone back at home can only imagine what it would be like, and yet here we stand. Now the question is, are we on a distant planet, and through use of the paintings, we can travel through a wormhole by means of cutting across the universe to get to? Or, perhaps we are on Earth, but in another dimension, as in part of the multiverse, and what has happened with the paintings is breaking the laws of physics, and is the result of a coming catastrophic event between dimensions. Charles took a deep breath and closed his eyes and did his best to imagine as if he was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. All he had to do was think of home and click his heels together 3 times and he'd be back. He opened his eyes and the same scene laid before him, and that frustration grew a little more. I'm not like you, I can't be thankful for an opportunity that isn't something I would dare to dream of, Charles replied, but returned to Neil's face and added, this is beyond my mental capacity, and honestly I just want to get the hell back home. You will have your chance, said a voice from behind them. It was Valinar, and he walked with a pair of guards at his back, and he held a satchel in his right hand. Charles, I can tell you are a man of honor. You stick true to your words and stand for what is right. If not, stay to find Ed's killer, then at least retrieve your friend Shawn from suffering a fate worse than death. Jolene, she is nothing like anything you can imagine. How Valinar? How can I find him? I know nothing of the terrain or the laws of this world, and I am still 3 inches tall. Charles was trying to remain calm, but he struggled much with his emotions. Here, that's why I brought these. Valinar outstretched his hand that had the satchel in it and gave it to Charles. There are 3 powder bombs in there. The yellow one is a sleeping mist, the same thing Greg used on your bear friend, and I ask you to have him to be your guide, please. The purple one will shrink your enemies if need be, or perhaps yourself if you need to make a quick getaway. The last is the green one, and that will bring you back to your original height. Thank you, Valinar. Charles took the satchel and felt the gifts from the wood elf seemingly lift his spirits, and a sense of accomplishing his task now seemed achievable. Neil, would you be willing to go with him? Asked Valinar. With all due respect, I feel I have much to learn, and here I'm safe. Neil had answered. Plus, I can teach your entire clan the ways of science and how through that and engineering, you can live much more efficiently. We shall see. Valinar smiled and returned his gaze to Charles. Good luck, and please don't lose yourself here. With luck, we will see you again soon. I will give you a tip. Go to the Western Kingdom and seek aid there. You will find help for sure. It lies to the northeast of here, follow the road, and surely you'll run into it. Charles managed a smile. Valinar turned and took his guardsman with him, and once more, it was only Neil and Charles standing there. Neil then held out his hand for Charles, which he did shake for a moment. Good luck, detective, said Neil as a sudden grim expression showed on his face. Do you have any loved ones back home, like a wife and kids? My wife left me and my son was killed about 6 years ago. I never stayed in touch with any of my relatives. So, to answer your question, no I don't. Good. Cause time here may work differently, as I have stated before. So, the other couple here that you have yet to meet, well, since you're leaving you might not ever meet them. Anyways, they arrived here back in 1917 when the First World War was just getting underway. There is a story as to how they came across one of those magic-infused paintings, but some other time. Anyway, they came here from that year, 1917, and if you look at them, they might only be a decade older than when they arrived here. Okay, so this could be a slow-aging dimension. You make it sound like that's a bad thing. Charles was still hardly in the mood for riddles, he simply wanted the answer so that he could be on his way. That might be so, here, yes that might be the case, but they came here in 1917. I came here in 2020 as you and Shawn have. So, if the husband and wife that came here over 100 years ago are merely 10 years older than what they were before they got here, then maybe bringing your loved ones here so that they can live a very long time would be a blessing. Neil's explanation was intense and more than likely correct. Charles stood there in thought and wondered if that's what Argatha meant when she insisted that Chloe Spencer remained in Lufforain, because on Earth, she would age too quickly for Argatha to bear. Shawn has a wife, Charles said while shooting Neil a very worried look. I can't let Laurie be without her husband if I'm technically the one that got him here in the first place.